1 minute ago, judge rejects crazy appeal in court. DiDDy screams during trial. The following contains testimony allegations and graphic descriptions of abuse and manipulation. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is a dramatized but faithful recounting for educational and awareness purposes only. The federal courtroom was already tense. Day 7 of Sean Diddy Combs' trial had spiraled into a media frenzy, with whispers flying from press benches to courtroom corridors. But nothing prepared the packed gallery for what came next. The doors swung open. There was no entourage, no legal team trailing behind. Just a man in a slate-gray blazer, faded jeans, and a black notebook clutched in one hand. It was Joe Rogan, comedian, UFC commentator, host of the most downloaded podcast in the world, and now surprise witness. The room froze. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but sketch artists scrambled to capture every wrinkle of surprise etched across faces. Diddy's defense team looked blindsided. Reporters leaned forward. This wasn't just another headline moment. It was something different. He didn't walk in for the show. He walked in like he carried a vault of truths. The judge cleared his throat. "Please state your name and profession." "Joseph James Rogan," he said, voice steady. "Host of the Joe Rogan Experience." He paused, then added, "I'm not here for gossip. I'm here because I've heard things. On record, off record. Stories people were too scared to tell anywhere else, and I kept the tapes." A ripple ran through the courtroom. He opened the notebook. "Back in 2023, I interviewed a former bodyguard. He worked security for a major artist. Told me about a private server, encrypted files, hidden room. Said it was at Diddy's Miami compound beneath it. Like a bunker." Murmurs exploded from the gallery. Diddy looked tense, his lawyer on the verge of objection, but the judge motioned for Rogan to continue. "They called it the black box," he said. "Inside were recordings, video, audio of parties that weren't just parties. They were rituals. That's the word the guest used. Phones confiscated, blindfolds for guests, A-list celebrities in attendance, sometimes just watching, sometimes more. The term freak-offs was industry code," Rogan explained. "Code for gatherings that blurred the lines between elite fantasy and systemic abuse. I submitted clips to the DA's office. Some of the voices were verified by forensic teams. I didn't just bring stories, I brought receipts." The judge nodded. Prosecutors confirmed the files had been entered as evidence under seal. Joe flipped the page. "I've had everyone on my show, Navy SEALs, CIA agents, professors. But what I've heard about the entertainment industry," he looked over to the jury, "nothing has disturbed me like this. The kind of fear these guests spoke with. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival." He paused, letting the weight of that land. There was one guest, a producer, said he saw cameras hidden in smoke detectors. Guests filmed without consent. People were drugged. And Diddy called the footage leverage. The air turned cold. Diddy shifted in his seat. The defense finally objected hearsay, they argued, but the judge ruled that Rogan's testimony helped establish a pattern. He went on. "One videographer told me he filmed a party in 2015. After the event, Diddy's team took the footage, paid him off. Never spoke to him again." Joe flipped another page. "There was a stylist who came to my studio. Off air, she said she quit the industry after working at a Hamptons event, where she witnessed a two-way mirror cameras pointed inward. She was asked to sign an NDA in that room." Joe looked at the jury again. Different guests, different years, same details, same fear. Then came a name that dropped like thunder. She said Jay-Z was there, Joe continued. Not participating, but present, quiet, watching, like a ghost. The courtroom gasped. Rogan raised his hand. "I'm not saying he did anything illegal. I'm saying these accounts are too similar to ignore. People in power knew, and they said nothing." He leaned forward. "There was a term I heard over and over, Diddy's church. That basement vault in Miami. One of the bodyguards said it wasn't just a room, it was sacred, because it held power. A beat passed. The silence was sharp enough to cut through steel. He recounted a story from a former yacht staffer who'd written him a letter redacted to protect their identity. They were hired for a video shoot. When they got to the yacht, security confiscated phones, told them they were working for VIP clients. Once they were in international waters, the tone changed. Curtains drawn, guests brought in hourly, hidden cameras in mirror frames. Some crew members were allegedly instructed to spike drinks. Some refused, Joe said, others didn't. Then came the guest testimony. One man said he saw a performer in a mask led around like a prop. People laughed, filmed, watched. Famous people. He paused again. LeBron James, Gloria Estefan, Beyoncé, Jay-Z, all their names were mentioned, not because they participated, but because they were there. Another objection, overruled. Joe took a breath. There was one videographer, early 20s, though he was documenting a celebration. At the end, Diddy's people took his gear, paid him $5,000, told him he'd get a final cut. He never did. 2 weeks later, his apartment was broken into. The only thing missing, his external hard drives. This wasn't just a spectacle anymore. It was testimony that shook the courtroom. People risked their lives to speak, Joe said. Others were paid to forget. As he continued, he spoke of something darker, an ecosystem, not an incident. You're invited to a party, you sign an NDA, you're filmed without knowing. A month later you get a text, not a threat, just a reminder. Had fun last month. Let's keep that between us. Invisible handcuffs. That's what Joe called them. One producer, he said, was offered a career-boosting deal in exchange for deleting footage from a DiDDy event. He refused. Within a week, his tour was canceled at 3 venues. Then came a chilling account from a whistleblower. Worked for a third-party data recovery company. Said they were hired to pull encrypted video from a server video showing guests in compromising situations. They handed it over to federal agents. Joe's voice dropped. If even one of those tapes gets played in court, half this industry is finished. He looked straight at Diddy. If you're innocent, open the vault. Let them search the basement. Release the black box. The gallery was frozen in stunned silence. Even Diddy's legal team was visibly rattled. By now, this wasn't just about wild parties or celebrity scandals. It was about systemic manipulation. About fear weaponized as fame. And Joe Rogan host Comic Outsider was now a central figure in what was shaping up to be a generational reckoning. The courtroom air was dense, silent, yet electric. Joe Rogan remained composed, the pages of his black notebook flipping like clockwork. He wasn't delivering sound bites. He was weaving a web, a map of silence, fear, and leverage that pointed squarely to the core of a system, not a single man. The prosecution prompted him to expand on the black box. A former bodyguard, Rogan repeated, told me Diddy referred to the hidden room as his insurance policy. It wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. We're talking about biometric scans, air-gapped servers, hidden hardware. He called it his church because what was down there was sacred. The judge motioned for specificity. The guest claimed he once walked in during a backup session, racks of servers, drives being cloned, but he was ordered to leave, gun pointed at him. He never went near it again. The courtroom shifted. Joe turned another page. Multiple insiders told me there was a folder, real or digital, known as the rainy day file, supposedly stored off-site, Diddy's fallback if everything collapsed. The folder, I was told, included videos, contracts, photos, blackmail, and according to one source, even a U.S. politician appeared in one clip. Gasps. Objection. The judge struck the line, reminding the court that unverified references to specific political figures wouldn't be permitted. But the damage lingered in the air. Joe didn't retreat. He continued detailing how guests and industry insiders described nearly identical events, rituals, and rooms years apart. A hairstylist told me she quit the business after being asked to sign an NDA in a mirrored room. She suspected cameras were embedded in the frame. She had never seen anything like it before, or since. He paused. Another insider, this one worked PR, said DiDDy's inner circle had a rule. If you see something, you don't. If you hear something, you didn't. If you're lucky, you forget. The prosecution nodded, prompting Joe to address threats. I've received anonymous emails. Some said, stop talking about Diddy. One traced back to a PR firm linked to Rock Nation. Coincidence, maybe. But the message was clear. He looked toward the jury. This isn't just one bad man. It's a machine, powered by fear, protected by fame. The prosecution shifted gears. They asked about the Jane Doe lawsuits. I started connecting dots when court documents referenced behaviors my guests had already whispered years ago. The same names, same events. It wasn't gossip, it was a pattern. Joe flipped again. One of the most disturbing stories came from a former videographer, early 20s. He was hired to shoot what he thought was a party, January 2023 Miami yacht. He described people in masks, rooms drenched in red light, and guests being restrained. He was told to only film the smiles. Everything else was off limits. He glanced at his notes. He handed over his footage at the end, was paid $5,000, never heard back. Weeks later, his apartment was broken into. Only things taken as hard drives. The courtroom was frozen. A few jurors shifted uneasily. Others simply stared. Joe added, I archived a redacted transcript of that interview. I didn't air it, but I saved it. I knew this day might come. The prosecution nodded. The judge approved it for submission. Then Joe brought up a name that sent the room reeling again. Elon Musk. On my podcast, he casually mentioned Jennifer Lopez J-Lo, asked why someone so close to Diddy, who dated him for years, never said a word about what she might have seen. He wasn't accusing her, just questioning the silence. Joe leaned into the mic. Remember the 1999 club shooting? J-Lo was in the car when the gun was tossed. She said Diddy didn't do it. He walked. Shine took the fall, and she stayed with him for 2 more years. A chilling beat passed. What happens when the perfect partner is perfect for the devil? The courtroom murmured again. Joe pressed on. This isn't about criminal accusations against everyone who attended those events. It's about a code of silence. It's about how so many people kept showing up to the same parties and leaving with the same story. Nothing happened. He paused again, but the tapes say otherwise. He flipped to his last page. A whistleblower contacted my team 3 months ago, claimed they were hired to extract data from a corrupted server. Some of the video showed compromising situations. Faces blurred, but a few voices were recognizable. He made direct eye contact with the jury. They didn't go to TMZ. They didn't go to Rolling Stone. They came to me, because they knew I wouldn't edit their truth. The courtroom was silent, so much so that even the shuffle of a pen sounded like thunder. Rogan continued, I've talked with dozens of guests about these topics. Many of air, some trembling, some were crying. The same themes kept coming up: cameras, NDAs, secret rooms, powerful guests, and blackmail. Always blackmail. He paused before closing. If just one of these tapes is authenticated and played in court, the industry's mask comes off. The room held its breath. Joe's tone changed again, measured, low, certain. This isn't just about one man. It's about an empire built on secrets. Secrets held together by leverage and NDAs. And what scares the machine the most is sunlight. With that, he closed his notebook and leaned back in the chair. He had not come to entertain. He had come to expose. And expose he did. The courtroom wasn't reacting the same way anymore. They weren't gasping or leaning forward in curiosity. They were still absorbing, calculating. Even those skeptical at first now appeared unsettled. Joe Rogan wasn't playing in the gallery. He was making the walls talk. He shifted from names to mechanisms. You don't need to drug someone or threaten them with a weapon to control them, he said. You just need to make them afraid of what you've already seen. Joe recounted a conversation with an award-winning producer. He told me he attended a DiDDy event, once filmed part of it on his phone. The next morning he got a call. Someone told him to delete the footage. He refused. Within a week, 3 of his tour venues were canceled. No explanation. That was the difference, Joe explained. It's not just about what happens at the parties. It's about what happens after. It's the silence you're forced into, and the punishment when you break it. He turned to the idea of leverage again. One guest, a former security team member, told me there's a phrase they used inside DiDDy's circle, rainy day insurance. It referred to a cache of recordings, files, things you keep stored away off-site in case anyone ever tries to come for you. He paused. If someone powerful knows you have something on them, you don't need to say a word. They'll stay in line. The prosecution asked if he believed other celebrities were complicit. Joe answered carefully, I don't think every name mentioned did something illegal. But I do think many knew, and many stayed quiet. He referenced again the stylists, assistants, and producers who worked the periphery of these events. They weren't famous. They weren't invited for glamour. They were functional. They saw the things the guests didn't want recorded, but they remembered. He cited one woman who had worked on set design for a party. She told me she was instructed to design a space that looks like a private club, but functions like a recording booth. She didn't understand it until later, when she found out about the peephole behind the mirror. There was no need to dramatize. The stories spoke for themselves. The prosecution then returned to the 2023 yacht incident. Joe reopened that folder. One of the guests, a last-minute addition, said it felt like a masquerade, except people weren't hiding their faces out of shame. They were hiding identities, protecting reputations. He described how that same guest reported that security staff had body cams, but not for safety. They were told the footage was for internal review, but the guests suspected something more. Insurance, leverage, evidence. Joe let it hang. This is a system, he said. It runs on silence reinforced by power, sustained through fear. And when someone speaks, the system reacts not to correct itself, but to bury the source. The court knew this wasn't a typical celebrity trial anymore. He added one last name. A camera operator told me he worked 3 events. Never knew where the footage went. One day he asked. He was told, the cloud never forgets. A week later he was fired. NDA served. Phone wiped. Joe looked toward DiDDy, then toward the jury. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here for views. I'm here because too many people trusted me with their stories, and if I don't say something now, they'll never be heard. He closed the notebook slowly. And when you understand how deep this goes, you stop asking why nobody spoke up. You start asking how anyone still stayed. Joe Rogan stood calmly, his notes tight in one hand, the other resting on the edge of the witness box. The courtroom had grown heavy with stillness, not from boredom, but from weight. A weight that now pressed down harder with every word he chose to speak. You have to understand, Joe began again. This wasn't just about DiDDy throwing wild parties or pushing boundaries. This was about constructing a system, an ecosystem of silence, power, and leverage. He flipped to a new page of handwritten notes, this one worn from use. I call it the machine, and it's real. He described it like a pyramid, celebrities at the top, beneficiaries in the middle, and the voiceless workers, the assistants, videographers, stylists, and background players at the bottom. Those at the top knew. Some even benefited. But those at the bottom, they saw everything. And they were the ones who whispered their stories to me off camera, off air, terrified of being heard. He mentioned an anonymous message that came through his podcast email inbox 2 months prior. No name, no signature, only a subject line. There's more. The message detailed a server room in the Miami compound, reinforced, air-gapped, guarded by biometric security, and backed up weekly to a satellite data bank. Joe had never shared the details publicly, but now he did. This person said the server held thousands of hours of footage, not just from parties, but from hotel rooms, dressing rooms, even private jets. Footage collected over years without permission. Diddy's legal team shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind their hands. The prosecutor asked, "Why hold on to something like that?" Joe didn't hesitate. Insurance, control, leverage. He described how one former bad boy artist confided in him about being approached years after he left the label. The message, "We still have the tape. No one said what was on it. They didn't have to." "I've interviewed Navy SEALs, CIA agents, cartel defectors," Joe said, "and none of them were as visibly shaken as some of the industry insiders. I've spoken to people who used to work for Diddy or be in his orbit." Then came a new revelation. A month ago, Joe said a tech contractor came forward. He claimed he had been hired to do data recovery for a private client in Miami. The job involved recovering footage from a damaged drive, but once he opened it, he panicked. What he saw wasn't corrupted. It was explicit, illegal, and deeply incriminating. Joe said the man turned over copies to a federal contact through an anonymous third-party drop. "We don't know if the feds have it yet, but if they do, it changes everything." He pulled out a folded letter. The court allowed him to read from it under seal. The content included multiple recognizable faces. No names were spoken, but the faces said enough. He didn't read those names aloud. He didn't have to. The jury was visibly disturbed. 2 members sat back, hands over their mouths. Another scribbled a note furiously. One defense attorney began objecting. Joe had to stop mid-sentence. But the judge overruled again. "Patterns matter," Joe repeated. "They're what help us distinguish chaos from strategy." He went on to describe how the machine retaliates. When a guest breaks the rules, refuses an NDA, pushes back, or asks questions, they disappear. Not literally, but professionally. They lose gigs. Agents stop calling. Labels quietly pull their support. Joe shared a story about a female R&B singer, once on the rise, who turned down an invitation to a Diddy event. After learning what it entailed, within 3 months she was dropped. Tours canceled. PR scrubbed her appearances. When she came on Joe's show years later, she wouldn't say Diddy's name on air. She just said, "He was the sun, and if you stood in his shadow, you couldn't grow." Then Joe returned to the night that disturbed him the most, the yacht party in international waters. The crew member told me they were forced to surrender their phones. Cameras were embedded in mirrors. A man was brought in wearing a leather mask. People cheered. Others filmed. He took a breath. There were children's toys in one of the lower decks. "No kids, just toys. I'll let you make of that what you will." The court was silent. The prosecution asked, "Were any of those guests celebrities?" Joe nodded. "At least 3 A-listers. I won't say their names here, but you know them. Everyone in this courtroom does." He said the crew member was offered $20,000 to forget what he saw. When he refused, his home was broken into a week later. Nothing was stolen except his hard drives. Not even his laptop, just the external drives. That's how specific the threat was. Joe then described what he called the invisible leash, the way people in power control those below without needing contracts or weapons. Sometimes it's a look. Sometimes it's a reminder. Sometimes it's nothing more than a phone call from someone you've never met, telling you they liked your last interview, but to keep your mouth shut next time. He said he'd gotten those messages himself, anonymous, subtle, often phrased like compliments. "But I'm not built that way," he said. The courtroom began to understand this wasn't about a wild celebrity lifestyle. This was about structure. It was a silent empire built over years, run not by party invitations, but by consent disguised as opportunity. "You don't take down Puff," one insider once told him. "Not unless you want to bring half the industry down with him." And that was the point, Joe concluded. They protected him because protecting him protected themselves. The jury looked over at Diddy. He was silent. For the first time since the hearing began, he hadn't whispered a word to his counsel in over 10 minutes. Joe lowered his voice. If even a fraction of this is true, this trial isn't the end. It's just the first crack in the dam." And with that, he turned a final page in his notes. As Joe Rogan stepped down from the stand, the air in the courtroom shifted. Not with movement, but with stillness. Everyone felt it, jurors, attorneys, reporters. A subtle realization that something irreversible had just occurred. Not a verdict, not a conviction yet, but a collapse, of illusions, of reputations, of silence. DiDDy remained motionless, his hands interlaced on the table before him. His defense team began speaking in hushed tones, but he didn't react. He stared forward. Behind him, aides exchanged frantic glances. A few seemed to be texting constantly. Others simply stared at Joe's retreating figure as he exited the witness box. The judge called for a recess. Reporters flooded the hallway. Some didn't even wait for quotes. They began broadcasting live from their phones, stammering half-formed sentences. "This is unprecedented. Joe Rogan under oath. The vault. The black box. Freak-off footage." Inside the defense room, the mood was electric with unease. Lawyers huddled around laptops. Aides made calls with hands pressed over mouths. One of them whispered, "We need to reach Gloria's team, now." But the damage had already taken shape. Across the internet, hashtags were erupting. Black box, vault of silence, leverage culture, and the most viral of them all, Rogan told it. Clips of his testimony were being dissected in real time. Twitter threads were mapping timelines. Reddit sleuths dug up old interviews. Subtitled TikTok edits began surfacing. Every second of Rogan's time on the stand was being reinterpreted by an audience hungry not just for scandal, but for clarity. By the time the court reconvened, the temperature in the room was different. It wasn't just about one man anymore. The implications stretched too far, touched too many names. And those names weren't fringe. They were foundational to modern entertainment politics and global media. The prosecution returned with renewed force. Their next witness was a forensic IT expert. He confirmed that Rogan's submitted files contained unaltered metadata, timestamps securely originating from devices registered to individuals connected to the bad boy label. He didn't name names, but he didn't need to. The jurors leaned in as the expert scrolled through logs, security footage, metadata, GPS embedded file strings. The details were undeniable. Even the defense didn't object, they only asked to delay admitting the files until further review. But the prosecution had already anticipated that. Next, they brought in the anonymous tech contractor Rogan had referenced. His identity-protected voice distorted, the contractor explained through pre-recorded video testimony how he was approached through an intermediary firm. No direct names were given, but the project name was Chilling Insurance Vault. Encrypted to the highest level I've ever seen, the contractor said. Multiple redundancies, cloud backups, cold storage drives. You don't build something like that unless you're planning for a major storm. When asked what was in the files, he paused before answering footage of private events. Political figures, industry leaders, people I never thought I'd see in that context. The courtroom was silent again. From the back row, one of the younger jurors shook his head slightly. Another whispered Jesus Christ beneath his breath. DiDDy's lead attorney attempted a redirect the next day, but it fell flat. The defense tried to frame Joe Rogan's testimony as inflammatory hearsay, but too much had already been corroborated, so they pivoted. They attacked Rogan's character, citing his history of controversial guests, inflammatory jokes, unfiltered interviews. But it didn't land, because this wasn't about what Rogan had said in the past. It was about what he had heard, and how those who were afraid to speak had chosen him as their mouthpiece. The prosecution returned fire by playing excerpts from the Joe Rogan Experience recordings, previously unaired, now cleared for trial. In one, a voice clearly stated they record everything, every party, every room, not for memories, for leverage. Another added, "They never said we'll ruin you. They didn't have to. They'd just mention a year, a place, a time. That was enough." The jury shifted. The weight grew heavier. Then came the financial analyst. He testified how large withdrawals were made from various shell companies linked to DiDDy's holdings payments in untraceable crypto funneled through offshore intermediaries. Routine maintenance fees, the paperwork said. But the numbers didn't lie. Hundreds of thousands of dollars routed through nondescript vendors, many registered in jurisdictions known for loose banking laws. The prosecution presented a single invoice. The vendor name, Black Box Logistics. Item, Vault Maintenance and Retention Protocol. The defense objected. The judge overruled. Then came a new surprise. A second whistleblower, this time a former audio engineer. He had once worked on a post-production team editing footage from a private party footage he believed was for a documentary. He quickly realized it wasn't. There were time gaps, he said. Segments cut to hide reactions. But the raw footage, I saw things I can't forget. Not just what people were doing, but who was watching. He refused to name names in open court, but he described the editing suite, how it had no internet, no cloud access, no backups. Everything was isolated, like a bunker, because they knew what they were sitting on. The term vault came up again. At this point, it wasn't just a word, it was a symbol of power, of secrets, of something deeper than tabloid drama. The prosecution's case had gone from anecdotal to systemic. This wasn't about one person behaving badly. It was about how entire circles of influence protect themselves by collecting and weaponizing truth. And every time someone refused to speak up, it reinforced the system. By day 4 of cross-examinations, it was clear the courtroom no longer viewed Joe Rogan as a rogue entertainer. He was now considered a lightning rod, someone who'd cracked open something bigger than himself. Reporters followed him to his car each night. Networks begged him for interviews. But he declined. I said what I needed to say, he told one outlet. Now let the system do the rest. Meanwhile, public pressure exploded. Congressional aides requested transcripts. Advocacy groups called for further investigations. Leaked memos revealed internal panic at multiple media conglomerates, and then the ripple reached the top. The Department of Justice quietly filed a motion to review sealed documents from past settlements connected to the bad boy label. An emergency injunction was denied. The floodgates were opening. Inside the courtroom, DiDDy began showing signs of stress. He no longer looked toward the jury. His posture slumped. His legal team no longer whispered strategy, they whispered survival. Because the court of public opinion had already begun to turn. And once that tide shifts, no one, no matter how powerful, can outrun the current. The trial wasn't over, but the tone had shifted forever. No longer a spectacle of celebrity downfall, it had become something far more unsettling, a public reckoning with the cost of silence. As proceedings wound down for the day, Joe Rogan sat alone in the back of the courtroom. He wasn't required to stay, but he remained, watching, listening, silent. The judge allowed him to make a final brief statement, an unusual move, but one no one objected to. Joe stood slowly. Not grandstanding, not posturing, just resolute. I've said a lot on the mic, he began. Some of it dumb, some of it is funny. But this was the one time I needed every word to count. He scanned the courtroom, the jury, the press, even DiDDy. Because if even one kid out there is saved from stepping into that kind of nightmare, then all of this, every threat, every NDA, every silent producer, it was worth breaking. He nodded once. No theatrics. Then stepped out of the box and walked past the defense table. DiDDy didn't look at him. The courtroom watched Joe Rogan leave, not like a hero, not like a martyr, just a man who carried too many secrets for too long, and finally let them go. And the machine for the first time didn't know how to respond.